Welcome back to another episode of Your Space with your host, Hannah Arinitwe. Now, we are still continuing this conversation around cultural, historical differences and how all these things all together can lead to the fight against corruption as a country. The conversation was still flowing heavily, and we're just here to add more on that. But before we get into it, allow me to introduce our guests in studio today. This time we don't only have one gentleman, we have two. I'll start right over there. Hello and welcome to the show.
Hello, pleasure being here. My name is Odongo Kelo. I'm a community organizer, I'm a certified counselor, and I'm a theatre practitioner as well.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show again. Hello and welcome to the show.
Hi, Hannah. Thank you for having me again. Hi, viewers. I'm very happy to appear on your screen again. Yes, we are very excited. We are going to talk about amazing things that you're going to love. My name is Joel Sakwa. Yes, over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. Hello, Dr. Patricia. Thank you so much for joining us again today.
Good evening, Hannah, and good evening, viewers out there. I am Patricia Chano Kiria, and I'm very happy to be part of this conversation this evening.
So, like I did say before, we are still having talks around cultural differences, historical differences, our history, past, present, coming together for the future. And as I shared last week, capitalism is one of the current trends in our society. And I think it has somehow diffused communism and oneness. And I just want to hear from you, Okello, from your experience on the ground. Do you think that it's right for us to blame capitalism? Because I feel like these days everyone is like, no, don't blame me. It's capitalism that is making me do this, you know?
It's debatable.
Subject to debate.
You're right.
You can't entirely blame it, and also you can't entirely rule it out. I think it's just, we can't, I think most people just use it as a scapegoat.
As a scapegoat.
Yeah, as a scapegoat, right. But I believe if in the context of Uganda, in the context of where we are right now and where we were, of course, to a certain degree, you could say, okay, it has brought in a lot of individualism. I'm not in the same age bracket as Mego, but if you follow the history of Uganda post-independence, right, it was hard to hear of a region that was undergoing either famine or having food insecurity. It was very hard. But in this 21st century, you hear regions in Uganda that have in the same country that have food insecurity and where people are dying of hunger. It's very, very laughable. You ask yourself, okay, what were the post-independence leaders doing that the leaders of today are probably not doing? Or what can we borrow from yesterday that we could probably do today, right? I've traveled for my community works across the country. Central region, the Baganda, it's one of the wealthiest. I think it's the wealthiest region. Ironically,
It may change.
ironically, and I will say ironically, Karamoja, with the mineral deposits it has, and I'm not even going to speak about the gold, but the marbles. Karamoja has the potential to be 500 times better than any region in Uganda. If only they worked, if only there were collective efforts. There is nothing in Kampala that can equate to what Karamoja has. But why is Karamoja? We stereotype Karamoja that we shall not wait for Karamoja to develop. You see, because these are things that we speak unknowingly, but instead we are sowing a seed into people. You get now. You start to look at them in a certain way. But if you go and study Karamoja as a region and the potential it has. There's no region in Uganda that can equate to what Karamoja has. Don't even talk about the oil that is in Bunyoro, because that's just a drop in the potential of Karamoja. So can we go back to collective efforts as a country? Can we view each other as one? Can we stop the stereotyping, right? The tribalization of people, the stereotyping, and instead look at ourselves as one. You get develop ourselves. Where if I see a Kakwa, a Madi, I'll look at him as a brother. If I go down, I see a Muchiga, a Mufumbira, I'll look at them as a Munyarwanda, I'll look at them as Ugandan. If I go to Sebe, I look at a person from Queen, a Sabine, I look at them as Ugandan rather than, because I believe it has gotten to a point whereby, to me, I want to partially blame our leaders and elders. Because I will use the word partially sparingly. Why? They have, over and over time, instead of utilizing a tone of reconciliation, they've utilized a tone of blame game, right? You get, it's this region, it's these people, there's no one who wants to take accountability for what is happening. So it's a whole
dilemma in there. Yeah. One of the very interesting aspects of culture and history, Dr. Patricia, is traditional institutions. Do you think that traditional institutions play a role when it comes to the fight against corruption in the country? Are they engaged in this process?
Well, when you look at traditional institutions, they play a very, very significant role because there are structures laid out in place. Like when you look at the paramount chief of the Acholi, he controls so many chiefs and clan leaders and families, which are, intertwined. So if we are to take, for instance, the war against corruption using that approach, it is very easy to penetrate up to the family level. If we are talking about inculcating values, then we can start it from that level. So I think it plays the traditional leadership plays a very, very significant role. If the traditional leader is intentional about owning the war against corruption, and not just among the actually traditional leadership, but in others as well. Then you did mention something about capitalism and communism. You realize that the fight against corruption is also influenced by several economic system or factors in place, because and both come into play. When you look at our country, we have both systems, and each one has got its unique characteristics which impacts on how corruption manifests itself. For instance, when you look at capitalism, where we're looking at market orientedness, where people are striving to generate profit as much and emphasize capital, private ownership of resources, free market, competition, and so on. You find that businesses then will begin thriving with maximization of profits and so on. And on the other hand, communism would look at it from a communal perspective, where we are looking at Burunji 1C, what is good for the common good for all? How would all Ugandans benefit from this? It's like that programs come in place to benefit Ugandans. Now, like Okello said, our leaders have done something. Our leaders have brought programs like the parish development model, the Emioga, there is now the GROW, and so many other programs to help people come out of the poverty line, to help people generate some income and make good use of this money to better themselves. But you find that there are some leaders who are also strategizing to steal that money. And me, in the inspectorate of government, while we do our work, it is so saddening to see a leader who is expected to be a person of integrity, holding a position of responsibility, dipping his hands. A leader who is above 18, by the way, dipping his hands in money, which is supposed to be for the common good and bettering the lives of people. Then isn't that leader a murderer? Because surely if something is to improve somebody's state and well-being, why should someone be stealing it? And that is the reason why we have institutions in place. We have the law, the legal and policy framework in place to help us get our people out of this kind of out of these things. But you find that it is very, very important to project the aspect of culture. If we can push the values using the cultural setups and tradition, if we can tailor make training programs and encourage more of consultative engagements and dialogue, so that we look at this country from a patriotic perspective. What is the common good for all Ugandans? If we talk about social responsibility, how will the other Ugandans benefit from these social responsibility programs? How can the ordinary Ugandan contribute to the war against corruption? So when we talk about the historical perspective and the cultural perspective, I think it is very, very important to have it all inclusive so that everybody looks at culture as very important, as a double-edged sword in the war against corruption. Because when you look at culture, there are cultural norms that perpetuate corrupt practices, but there are others that foster integrity, there are others that foster trust, there are other norms and practices that foster accountability. So by recognizing and leveraging these cultural dimensions in the society, I think anti-corruption initiatives can be more and more effectively designed, can be better implemented, and can also be better sustained. Because when you take the cultural angle, then there is ownership of it. The traditional actually pass on. So cultures, this is part of our thing. We need to revive these values. We need to teach our children integrity, honesty, and walking the talk, and so on. So sustainability will be one of those things to be emphasized. And we would also emphasize cultural awareness. Do the people out there know what their culture is? What are their norms? What are their totems? I was writing a book recently and someone said, but what is your totem? Set me back thinking, totem?
Do you know your totem?
Issues we don't have.
Hey, okay.
So I think it's important for us to encourage this cultural awareness in the efforts to fight corruption, but not only enhance engagement, but also promote a collective commitment, the collectiveness with unity of purpose to combating corruption to a more transparent society.
Yes. Let's just go in for a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back from that short break. We are still here on Your Space with your host, Hannah Arenitwe, alongside my great panel. So we've looked at culture and history, but I just really want to know from your perspective, Joel, you're still in university, right? On a rough estimate, how many young people do you think know where they come from, their cultural values or their historical values? But on a rough estimate, out of 10.
Okay, it would be difficult to think for everyone, but
Roughly, from your own,
okay,
like in your friend group.
Yeah,
Do you think people really know their cultural values? Or, for example, if we ask someone randomly, what is your totem? Do you think they would know at campus?
Yes, we don't have totems, but I think because culture is dynamic and our culture is dynamic, it keeps on changing. Because things change, people forget, values are eroded, and personally I wouldn't blame them. So I would give them around 4 out of 10, 4 to 5 out of 10. Yes, because personally, well, I've listened to the conversations, they have been beautiful, and I agree that culture and the cultural leaders, the people in our settings, in our domestic settings, have a major role to play in combating corruption. But, Hannah, I want to point you to this side. I feel that culture is a bittersweet pill.
What do you mean by it's a bittersweet pill?
Yeah, whereas it may be a solution to the problem, I feel like I think, let me say 50%, it's part of the problem. Why? Why? Because historically, you said, Hannah, today we are looking at our history and our culture. Historically, Professor Kanyehamba writes in his book, says that before the Uganda that we know got its borders, it contained, and I quote, chiefly and non-chiefly states, meaning several states that were independent. Yes, we didn't have the borders. These borders were made at Berlin, yes, in 1884, 85. So they just looked at, the boundaries next to the Nile, next to the mountain. So traditionally, Uganda did not exist. I'm sorry to say that.
Okay.
So what does that paint? It paints to me a picture that, well, we may be struggling with a bigger problem by creating more problems. So the creation of Uganda as a state in itself could be a problem. Why do I think so? Every society has its values, its culture, its traditions. Now, biblically, in the book of Daniel, there is a certain image that in one of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams he receives, where he sees like an image of gold. Then I don't know whether you've taken time to read, but if you study, you notice that one of the societies that they pointed to in the image had both clay and iron. So clay and iron was Rome. Rome finally got divided because it had different cultures, traditions. The barbarians are fighting, the Saxons, etc., etc. So it's similar to Uganda. The reason why we have nepotism, we are struggling with nepotism, but it's because Uganda in itself, the foundations are what? Are wrong. Allow me a minute, allow me. The foundations in themselves are what? Are wrong. Now, I feel like the bigger solution would be to supplant the cultures that we have, which would be very difficult. That's why I say it's a bittersweet pill. The solution would be to supplant the traditional cultures that we have with a greater culture.
What do you mean supplant?
Now,
Briefly.
Do away with certain cultures. In a nutshell, that's what you mean.
I don't want to be misunderstood.
Let me respond to that.
All right. Then I'll explain what I mean.
Let me speak to that, Hannah. Right. So, Sakwa brings a very interesting point. If you look at Uganda's borders, right, we extended up to Nakuru. That was in Kenya, right? Yeah. It's where you find the Luha in Kenya speak the same language as what? As the Bagishu.
Yeah, correct.
So his relatives were left out.
They are left to that side of Kenya. Because Uganda's border is extended up to that side, right? Now, a West Nile is going to stand up and say West Nile was a country on its own before it was added onto Uganda. Lado enclave with a flag, with an emblem, with a currency. It was a country of its own. You're going to come to the southwestern part of Uganda. This was gotten from the northern part of Rwanda and added onto what? Onto Uganda, right? It's where you still find the issues of the Banyarwanda disturbing us, right? But it's not their fault. You get, these are mistakes that were made by the colonialists. And one of the things I'm trying to address with the production I'm talking about is, how do we address our historical differences? You get, because there are many. His point is valid, right? His point is valid. At one point, when I was with a group of friends at my book club in Entebbe, one of the suggestions I actually brought out, there's a time we hosted the former Minister of Local Government, Tarcís Kawejere, and I pointed straight to his face and I said, one of the biggest undoing that the president has done in Uganda is to give autonomy to every tribe, every culture that wants to stick out. You find today they come Swaga, the next day you find these people, the Lu, the next day you find all these ones. This is another tribe on its own. So it has caused more division than what? Than unity. And now it goes back to the fact that this is, now if you read the historic books, historically, there are two contradicting statements from different historians, right? There are those that say Uganda has 4 nations. When I say 4 nations, these are...
more than that.
No,
Let
me first listen. There are people who say Uganda has 4 nations. I'm speaking of the Baganda, the Acholi, the Lango, and the Teso. They are originally known as the only nations in Uganda. But then there are those who are going to come out and say, include the Banyoro and the Nkore, the Banyankole, as in other communities. I don't use the word tribes to form the nations in Uganda. So if we are to look at the context of which he points out his issue, this is one of the issues I'm trying to say. It's going to bring in an aspect of nationalism. When the late Chief Justice, not Chief Justice, Speaker Olanya died, the Chief Justice forgot he's a national leader and went tribal. If you remember the remarks he made, which was on national paper, because that aspect had to come out. So when we speak, if we go to the context of what he's saying, you get it gets that sensitive.
For me, I think it is very important for us to know what transpired in Berlin. It transpired, the maps were drawn. You remember when you come close, 1900 Uganda, people walked out of certain significant meetings over the issue of the lost county, and so on. But as Ugandans today, we are not supposed to be lamenting. We should not moving forward. We are supposed to be talking about tailoring policy approaches to address some of these issues. We need to contextualize the strategies we have in the war against corruption. First of all, the anti-corruption strategies should be adopted to reflect these local realities. What is a local reality for us among the what do we take into consideration? What both cultural values and historical experiences, what lessons do we learn?
That's the right approach.
I cannot say let's expand this, let's take this culture out. No. But we need
I've not been allowed to defend myself.
One size
if we are to go by what he's saying, we are going to have issues in the country. We are going to have issues in this country.
Now, our time is really, really fast spent. But one more statement from Sakwa, and then
there is absolutely no way we can talk about engaging the cultural leaders. Right. We go and talk to the Acholi, Alu, but the reality remains that we are many tribes. 42.
No, Sakwa. Now, let me tell you, in context, Sakwa. In context,
it was my last word.
If you look at the tribes, I don't like the word tribes. If you look at the people, in the northern region, the spectrum, we have a lot of commonalities amongst us than differences. A lot of things that are common within us. So if you're to say that we are divided, because it's the thing I had with Professor Tassis. I'm like,
that is why it's important for me to conclude that in combating corruption, it is vital to respect and integrate cultural and historical differences in our approaches to fighting corruption. And I think by fostering and understanding and empowering communities, we can tailor strategies that are all encompassing, and also building resilient institutions and create more an effective framework in the fight against corruption, because it's only through a collective effort like we all agree to, collective effort and context sensitive strategies which can help us diminish some of this corruption grip on society. When we all agree and say these approaches will work better for us. So I think that is the better way forward.
Feel free to continue this conversation on our Twitter at Your Space Uganda. Thank you so much for joining us. See you again next week. Bye-bye.